Most of you, if not all of you in this room, are entrepreneurs and successful too. So what I thought of focusing on is my personal experience as an young tech entrepreneur back in 90s. So before I came to this country in 1989, before I took the flight in Hyderabad, I went to visit late Mr. Sudireddy, a great legend of VHP and a big RSS person. And he gave me a book written by Swami Vivekananda, and he said, keep it with you. And then when I was coming in the flight, Lufthansa, I read the whole book because you couldn't sleep, so I read the whole book. I remembered one statement Swami Vivekananda said, arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. And that kept on ringing in my mind. Then when I went to work for Bell Labs, I always wanted to go start my own company. And then the time came back in mid-90s, and I started a company, and rest is history. So I'll go through my personal experience, starting a company, a tech company as an entrepreneur. There were three major things. Are we going through the slides? Or? Oh, thank you. So there are three things, and all three of them are big feats as a young first-time entrepreneur: the start, the build, and the exit. And we don't even know what the build and the exit means when we start, but the start itself was a huge feat. I'll tell you why. When you are in late 20s, especially in 90s, now you can start a company when you are teens too, and you can get funding. But when you are in 20s, back in 90s, nobody would give you money. So that's a big feat, but the big thing I wanted to say is the fear of failure. That's a huge thing in our Bharat society. We are a hierarchical society, so people say, laugh at you or the relatives or friends, and so that fear of failure is really ingrained in us for some reason, but it's not. I read the entire Ramayana and Mahabharata, and it wasn't there. Sometime in the middle of last century or somewhere, the fear of failure came into our brains. So that's a problem. And then we have to do family sacrifice, leaving a high-paying job and a great job and a great company. I used to work at Bell Labs, and working at Bell Labs was a prestige back then. It was tough. So that you have to overcome. So that's a big feat in itself. And then I was in late 20s, when I went to a VC, he literally threw me out and said, you don't know what you're talking. You go get more experience and come back. But I didn't give up. So we need to keep going back and going back. One thing that helps is, like, if you have a co-founder or co-founders and the advisors, that would help if being an young entrepreneur. So that kind of helped me a lot. Especially if you have a co-founder with a gray hair. Back in 90s, it was a great thing too. And then the VCs look at you and say, hey, you never managed money before. How do you trust you, right? How do I trust you? That was a big hurdle. And then I had to promise that I would hire a gray-haired or experienced CEO, and then they would budge, and you can get the money. But nowadays, that's not there, which is good. The next thing is you have to give up 50% of the company, if not more. That's something that you have to go through a conviction. Do you want to do it or not? So one thing that I learned was the pie size, right? If you give up the company, if you don't give up the company, if you're worth $10 million and you own 100% of the company, it's $10 million. But if you give up 50% of the company and you are worth $100 million, 50% of it is $50 million. It's still a big thing. So somebody taught me how to look at the pie size, and then I got over that hurdle of giving up company to other people. And the last one is the angels versus VCs. That was a big decision that you all have to go through too. So one of the things that I had to go through is like how difficult is it, and how long would it take, and how much money is required to make this happen. So then you'll start figuring out how deep the pockets have to be. In the current world, it's much easier to start a company with very less capital. Back in 90s, to start a hardware company, you need a lot of capital. So you'll have to figure that out, whether we go through VC or angel route. So these are 5 major feats to start the company that I went through and then gotten over. And then we got started. So the next one is, how do you build it, right? That's a tough feat too. So one of the things is, never hired people before. You're an young guy who would come and work for you. You don't have many connections. If you had worked in many different companies and you manage a lot of teams, then it gets a little easier to hire people. But if you're a young guy, then you don't have much history, worked in the same company. So there again, the co-founders, if you have, and then the board members will play a role. That's how I got help and got started. And one other thing is, always I try to hire people who are smarter than me, who are better at what they do. That would really add a lot of strength to the company. Next one is customer partnerships and with trusted relationships. That's an important thing too. If you're building a product company, especially in the technology world, it's very important to have early adopters and early customers and teaching customers. And I focused a lot on that. And thanks to Mr. Mukesh Charter, is one of my early customers and teaching customer. That's also very important because people back then used to run for the gold mine and go and get these 800-pound gorillas as your first customers. Most of the experiences, they only crush you. They really don't help you or steal you. There's a lot of examples, especially IBM, Cisco, Intel, these 3 notorious, and nowadays Apple and these guys, they're very notorious for, hey, my innovation is mine, your innovation is mine too, that kind of attitude. So they can crush you too. So you have to be careful on who you partner with initially, whether they copy, steal, and then really push you out of business, or are they patience with you? Will they be able to wait? Sometimes shit happens and it can get delayed and issues happen. So that's a key in building relationships. And then as I told you, I read Mahabharata and Ramayana. Lord Shri Ram, you would have killed Ravan probably with a little finger. But he didn't do that. He created partnerships. And, right? So that's very important. And Lord Sugriv, the monkey kingdom, and he went and figured out. So creating these alliances and partnerships were taught back in Ramayana days. So then how do you scale, how fast, how slow? So it's a catch-22 a lot of times. You can try to scale fast and burn money and run out of money. Or you stay back and then lose the market. So time to market is everything. So how much money you spend, how fast you spend, then if you run away money, then you are in a weaker position with your investors. So that's something that I've seen in many companies, either didn't spend enough money to get faster and miss the market window, or spend too much money and went out of business, or maybe able to raise more money with less valuation. So that's another problem that we were to overcome. And then most importantly, we should continue to have an inner circle and a mentor. So even Lord Shri Ram or Arjuna, and they had mentors too. So it's very important to brainstorm these ideas, and at the tough times and you feel lonely. So having a mentor outside of your board is the key, and I was able to do that. And then the fifth last one is the pivot, right? So there's no shame in changing your product direction if required. So being dogmatic of what you want to do and what you started with can take you in the wrong direction. Sometimes being a pivot, because You learn a lot. Once you start a company, you go visit customers, they give you a lot of feedback, you learn about your competitors. So if you look at the Mahabharata war, how many pivots have taken place? So depending on who the commander-in-chief, whether it's Dron or whether it's the Bhishma, so there were different tactics that were used to beat the competitor. So there's no shame in doing that. We started off with my first company. We started with an IP company, but then after I talked to Mukesh ji and a lot of other people, customers, we ended up doing ICs, semiconductor chips. So we had to pivot on our product direction. So these are some of the things that are needed to build a company. And last but not the least, the exit. Again, in technology companies, especially there is a venture investment involved. Exit is important. We can't run the company for the rest of our life as a consulting company and start paying ourselves. Either you have to sell the company or go IPO so that the investors get paid. So that was very important. The big thing is, do you sell or do you go public? And who knows? That's a big question, right? It's a $1 million question. Again, at what stage? Even if you're a public company, you probably have to be sold too, right? Whether it's for $10 million or $1 billion or tens of billions of dollars, public companies are sold or broken up. So this whole thing, there's a lot of economics involved. But the economic side is one thing. The human side is another thing I want to go over. Who do you sell and why? And the post-sale situation, right? So sometimes if you're going public, you're going public. There's no issue. But if you're selling and you have multiple offers, who do you sell? Either you take the highest bidder or do you look at the post-sale situation? If you look at Ramayana and Mahabharata, they thought of post-war situations all the time. What could happen? So the post situation, if you look at Bhishma and the Hindu dharma is the kingdom's Acharya was supposed to train the prince. But Bhishma thought that Arjuna was so powerful that Kripacharya is not capable of, or not enough to train Arjuna. So he had to go out and get Dronacharya to train Arjuna. So if he settled for Kripacharya, Arjuna would not have become probably that great of a fighter. So we can learn from that. So what is the next, right? So whether you have to think about keeping the people, or maybe people get fired, or all these things have to be thought through. And what price? Do you take cash or stock? If you take cash, you walk away with cash. If you take stock, there's an upside. So there's a lot of decisions that go through in the sale process. And we have to go through that too. When you have multiple offers, you have to go through all these things. And then what do you do after the sale? And again, it depends on where you are in your life cycle. So if it's a third company, fourth company, or if you're somewhere in the mid or late career, maybe you want to move on. When I sold my company, I was still young. So we started my company. Within a year, we sold the company. So it was great for me to stay on and learn a lot. How the organizations work, how do you build, how do you scale, how do you work with the different countries in the world. That was helpful for me, but every situation is different. That's another thing we need to be thinking about. And then what do you do with your money, right? One of the great things that at least here we learn, and the Hindu Dharma also showed that, is before and after life. So if you have money, if you don't have money, you don't think about afterlife. But if you have money, you have to think about what happens after life too. So that's what we had to go through, all those three things, and then rest is history. When you are doing multiple companies, or company after company, then it becomes easy. But the first company as a tech entrepreneur, this is what I had to go through. And that's what I have. Thank you.